Thank you, Nancy. Excited to have you here. Next, we have Liza, who's the founder of In Our Name. So, Liza, can you please just share a bit about your work with us?
Oh, hi guys. I'm the founder of In Our Name, and as the name states, we are changing the narrative of products that comes out of Africa, being African myself. So we intentionally created the brand to focus on poverty alleviation and capacity building in Africa. We are based in London and in Nairobi, and everything we do is sustainable. We have a period poverty project using our waste fabric, and we work with artisans as well, and we give back 100% of our net profits back to artisans as part of our poverty alleviation objectives.
Amazing, amazing. Next, we have Anne, who's the co-founder of SAWA SAWA.
Hi guys, my name is Anne Dwayne. I am the co-founder of SAWA SAWA. SAWA SAWA means it's going to be okay in Swahili. And that's our promise to the artisans we work with in Kenya. And our goal is to help the women in Kenya who have such intricate, beautiful weaving and beading and so many other skills, use what they have, where they are to help themselves rise out of poverty. And just like Liza said, our goal is to help these artisans gain equity by giving them the resources they need to solve all their problems, because they have everything they need to solve the problems.
Amazing. And next we have Emma, who is the founder and director of Collective Fashion Justice. Hi, Emma.
Thank you. I'm Emma Harkinson. I am the founding director of Collective Fashion Justice. We are a charity that exists to create what we call a total ethics fashion system. Total Ethics Fashion is also the name of my book, and it's basically the premise that in order for us to protect the planet, we need to actually put people, animals, and the planet all ahead of profit and take a more holistic approach.
Okay, great. So now we're going to go into the conversation. Today we're talking about empowering change, fashion and lifestyles roadmap to reducing inequalities. And from the introduction from all of our speakers, we know that we're going to have an amazing conversation already. So the first question, and I'm going to be asking Liza this question, is how can the fashion industry actively contribute to reducing social inequalities, especially in terms of fair labor practices and wage inequality? Because I think that this is a conversation that the industry has had over and over and over. But how do you think that the industry can actively contribute to reducing social inequalities?
Thanks, Rhoda. I think it's a very complex question, to be honest, because a lot of fashion brands are sourcing and buying product from territories that don't have minimum wages or don't have well-defined labor standards and frameworks. So I think it creates a loophole that, if you're chasing profit, it's an easy route to market for a lot of the brands. But having said that, I think there are individual brands and suppliers and manufacturers, particularly in the Far East, which is a lot more evolved supply chain, that, although there isn't a minimum wage, they are trying to pay their workers a living wage. They provide creches. There are soft provisions that they are, as a give back to the community of workers. But it is a very big conversation, and as long as countries don't have strict labor laws and don't have minimum wages or a living wage or a decent working wage, I think there will always be a loophole for exploitation. And we know those companies, we know those brands. But for example, Ethiopia, I've in the latter part of my career focused in Africa. Ethiopia and Rwanda don't have a minimum wage. Kenya does, and it has a very robust labor policy. China has really improved since I started working in China a few decades ago, but that's been the pressure from pressure groups. So I think, in conclusion, I think it's about coming together collectively. You know, the pressure groups doing their bit in terms of putting pressure on these organizations, and also a little bit about the, you know, consumers understanding, you know, how much is a product. You know, buying a product for $5.99. You know, there's some exploitation in that, you know, if it's a top or something. So I think there's a lot to be explored, but there is some progress, but we have a long way to go.
I agree. I completely agree. So I hear pressure groups, I hear coming together, I hear working with countries that have minimum wage, and brands paying attention to paying living wage to the artisans and the people that they work with. So, and I think the next question is going to go to Anne, because I know that you also do a bit of work in Kenya. So do you want to touch a bit on that, and also just share with us how working with the artisans in Kenya contributes to equity for the current generation of women and the next generation of women that you work with in Kenya?
Yeah, I work with artisans in Kenya. We're based in Austin, Texas, and Nairobi, Kenya. So our goal is to harness the ancient craftsmanship of the artisans in Kenya. And they make such beautiful baskets and ornaments and decor. They make everything. And if we work with groups and organizations and places where you're able to pay the people creating the fair wage that they need, while showing them how to use the skills they have and the resources that grow around them to lift themselves out of poverty by paying them the right amount of wage and not exploiting them, you're building something that has a great foundation for yourself and for the country you're selling to and for the consumers you're targeting. And so working with artisans is, I think, the best way to alleviate poverty completely in Africa, because women want so much to feed their children, get their girls to school, do what's right for the next generation of the kids they're raising. And they already have the resources and the skills. So why not come together as brands, as creators, as suppliers, as stores like here in the USA, and work with companies that have the goal of sustainability, ethically made, fair trade. And that way we slowly move away from the $5.99 tops. You know, if we're not buying it, they're not selling it. So with your money, you can vote for a better future. You can vote for a better industry. So I'm very passionate about it, because we've watched these women we work with in Kenya come in very, you know, not sad, but you can tell they have the weight of poverty on them. And slowly you can see the joy, the dancing, the music. And Africa provides all of that. And we all came from Africa,
Yes,
so we should all be invested in bringing the continent out of poverty. And when it's not poor, we can all go back there and have a nice vacation on a nice beach. You know, it starts with cleaning up the poverty and helping everybody be in an equal. By equal, I mean giving people the resources they need to be the best versions of themselves. And I think that's what we do with the artisans in Kenya.
Amazing. That's so insightful. And I think I hear two things that you're saying. So you're saying big brands should work with sustainable brands that work with artisans, and then the sustainable brands that work with artisans should pay the artisans the worth of their work. So it's a two-level sort of influence or impact. You know, brands working with sustainable brands, and then the sustainable brands ensuring that the women that they work with, the artisans that they work with, get, you know, fairly paid for the amount of work that they do. And I completely agree. I know that there is a lot of poverty on the continent, but there's also a lot of creativity. And I think that we see a lot of sustainable brands now paying more attention to artisanal craftsmanship, and seeing how that can be refined and used as a tool to get women and young people out of poverty. So thank you so much, Anne, for sharing that. And I mean, still speaking about equality and inclusiveness in the industry. So I'm going to ask Nancy this question is, how can the fashion and lifestyle sector become more inclusive? And not just in terms of models or talents, but in terms of the supply chain and leadership roles. So how can we have more inclusive, how can we see more women in leadership roles? How can we see more disabled people in leadership roles? How can the fashion sector become a lot more inclusive?
Well, we can't wait for the leadership the people in leadership and fashion industry to act. We need them to act. So we start with ourselves. We start with ourselves. We educate ourselves. And that said, educating ourselves in today's world is extremely challenging. So that's where I say the media plays an important role in promoting inclusivity, in reducing inequality. It's being able to decipher what are facts. You know, we talk about ethical fashion. We also need ethical reporting. We, as Liza said, we know the companies, we know the brands that we should be supporting. Get them to the consumer so we can have conscious consumption. I do always hesitate when I talk about this because I don't want to be judgmental. You know, we all have our stories, and there were times where I could not afford anything, maybe more than a $5.99 garment for my child. But I had options, and that's where I think in educating and making sure communities have them, as far as our thrift stores and the organizations that promote options instead of fast fashion, extending the life cycle. So that's something we can do as a consumer. As far as inclusivity and in leadership, I talk about education. Well, there's education establishments, curriculum, building into the curriculum. And it doesn't have to wait till college. It doesn't have to be in the fashion industry. Integrating into the curriculum. What does inclusivity mean? Not just in fashion, but in our lives. So that's something that we can incorporate. So to me, that's the role of leadership in our education institutions and building our curriculum. I talk about ethical news and social media. You know, social media is a double-edged sword, or triple, or whatever. It can be great, but it also can be a real detriment. So again, I think balancing the role of it and how it can help paint a picture. What does it mean to be inclusive? And I've had experience, which I can share later, where I got to be an inclusive designer, but it was a one and done, or it was like for a show, or it wasn't mainstream. And we've got to get past where it's just a token face. It becomes, we understand the importance of it.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So I hear ethical media, I hear education.
A little passionate about it.
Oh no, we love it. I hear ethical media, I hear education. And I think we're going to come back to that conversation. But 599 is sort of popular right now in this room. So Ima, I'm going to ask you, a lot of times when it comes to ethical and sustainable fashion, is usually associated with high prices. How can the industry make sustainable fashion more accessible to a broader audience? So just like Nancy had shared that at some point she couldn't afford, certain items because of the price, but how can we make it a bit more accessible and affordable and make it a bit more mainstream?
I think that there's a few different parts to this question. I think the first is that fashion doesn't exist within a vacuum, and just as we're asking for living wages to be paid to the people who make our clothes, everyone should be paid a living wage, and people would be better able to afford ethical and sustainable fashion if they were paid a living wage in their job, whether they work in retail or in any kind of product anywhere. So that's part of it. I think also we have to consider, the true cost of clothes when we talk about something being more expensive. The $5.99 top, the actual cost of production has just been outsourced. It's been outsourced to the woman who made it, who was not paid a living wage. It's been outsourced to the environment that is suffering as a result of, the unsustainable production. And how do we fix that? I think when we look at people with economic privilege who can afford to buy ethical and sustainable clothing, we know it's more just about buying less, but buying higher quality garments. But for the people who aren't in that position, where the $5.99 top really is their option, I think that's where we need to move towards government intervention. For example, so many government subsidies, particularly in Western countries, fund the fossil fuel industry that makes our polyester, that makes our synthetic materials, funds feedlots behind leather industries, funds, or allows tax breaks for the massive corporations that are exploiting people for their labor to be able to sell clothes at a really cheap price. I think if we can have a government level intervention on those kinds of issues, if we can subsidize those that are producing in a responsible way, we're going to see a bit of an equalization in what is expensive fashion and what is accessible fashion. That is no small goal, but I think that that's kind of the top goal that we need to have if we want to really equalize and make this kind of responsible fashion accessible.
Okay, so I think I agree with that, and it's no small goal indeed. But I think that that's a part of the conversation we need to pay attention to, even beyond just being brands. How can we sort of start to collaborate with the ecosystem, have conversation with the government and everyone involved in just how in labor policy, ensuring that living wage is higher, people are earning more, and that way they're able to afford more quality and sustainable items. Thank you so much, Emma, for sharing that. So I'm going to go to Anne now, and we're going to go back to the conversation around artisans and communities. So how can fashion brands collaborate more with local artisans and communities to create economic opportunities and preserve traditional craftsmanship? I know that you've worked with a couple of brands, but how can we bring in more brands into that ecosystem? How can the bigger brands start to pay attention to partnering with artisanal communities, paying attention to craftsmanship, and just creating more economic opportunities for these marginalized communities?
Yes, and to follow Emma, she made a very good point. A lot of people are like vegan fashion and non-animal fashion, but they're carrying a fake leather bag. I'd rather carry a leather bag that an animal went to food for a community as opposed to that plastic that lasts on our landfills forever. And if vegan or, sustainable fashion is the goal, then we have all these fibers that come out of Africa and Thailand and that are really good, that are really natural and are truly circular, that when they go into that landfill, let's say everybody wants to buy a bag every day, they go back to the landfill, they're going to slowly disintegrate into the soil. And that's one thing, like she was saying, a lot of governments are subsidizing these other companies that are creating this fake leather, fake this, fake that looks like the real thing. When we have, for example, I work with artisans in Kenya that creates beautiful basket out of agave. The agave plant that we use here in the States and Mexico for tequila, they use the fiber in it and grasses, and we have a company out of Nigeria called AAKS that creates these beautiful bags that are now in Nordstrom, Neiman Marcus, they're everywhere. And they are truly handmade. They use their artisans, and the artisans have honed these skills for tens of thousands of years. We all lived in Africa. We migrated around Africa. I just got my DNA done and I'm 100% African. So it means for 1,000 years, nobody left the continent. And so we've been building these skills and create. When you see them create, I got to spend time with them when I was in Kenya this year. I couldn't do it, but it's so beautiful the way they do it. And why would we not support that when that is putting food on the table of that woman? When we met one of the groups that I visited, their kids were not in school. They didn't have toilets in their compound. And when we went back, there were goats, there were chickens. They made us like this beautiful chicken soup. It's on my social media. And you feel so bad eating their chickens because they just bought them, because you were there before they had chickens. But you see the effect you're making on these people. It's so wholesome. And so going to these other brands, when you look at Kate Spade, you see they partner with companies that create some baskets and turn, add leather and stuff and turn them into these luxury products. And at the same time, you see AAKS is partnering with Nordstrom and Neiman Marcus and all these other companies. Mifuko out of Kenya, out of the Netherlands and Kenya, like the way Liza is out of London and Kenya, and I'm out of Texas and Kenya. They work with Chloe, a luxury basket, a luxury brand that now uses those baskets to create totes and crossbody bags and accessories and ornaments made by hand in Kenya. So I feel like if these companies that work to source products, they can source products from brands like me that go directly to the women and clearly show the statistics and the data that we are working with these women and we are empowering them, the same way they would use other companies using the fake leather out of China or wherever they are sourcing them from. So it's just a matter of choice and a matter of consumers that buy these things wanting to do something that has an effect, that's sustainably made, that's ethically produced, that is circular, that is good for the planet, the people. And when they do that, they will always gravitate to where the money is. They will always gravitate to what is selling. And if that's what we are buying, then that's what they're going to be selling. And there's so many of them now working with brands like me, but we need more to slowly phase out all the polyester, plastic, leather looking stuff or whatever else, and come into the wholesome, planet conscious products. And I'm also very passionate about this. I can talk about it forever.
Yes, and I think another important angle to also look at is what Nancy had mentioned earlier, which is ethical media. I think that, not enough conversations are happening about the amazing work that, this artisanal brands or this artisans, and just the amount of creativity that's coming out of these communities, in Africa, in Asia. I think that another thing that we can start to pay, I think somebody's mic is okay. I think that another thing that we can start to pay attention to, even as brands that work in these communities, is how can we use media more to promote our message? How can we use social media more to promote our message? I think sometimes we're so stuck in the background doing the work, which is great, but we are not making as much visibility, or we're not putting out as much information as we should about the quality of the work that we're doing, and about even what consumers get, when they buy from these brands, and how they just change lives. I mean, look at the story you just shared, Anne. It was so touching. And I think that, the more people know that they buy a bag and an entire family is transformed, the more, consumers will be willing to buy more bags. And the next question I'm going to ask Liza, and it has to do with education. How do you think that the fashion industry can contribute more to education? Do you think that we're using education enough? How do you think that we can do more with education and skill building initiatives? And when I think of education and skill building, I think about it in two ways. I think maybe Nancy would answer the second way, but the way that I want you to answer, Liza, is how can we use education and skill building initiatives to empower individuals from these marginalized communities that we are, speaking on, especially individuals who want to pursue careers in the sector?
I think I'll talk about Africa because that's the space I'm in at the moment. Although I've worked across the world, I think when we talk about skills and education, I think there's formal education and there's informal education. So there's almost like a cultural education, and there's the classroom education. So in African society, it's all about storytelling, about community, about sitting together and stuff like that. So, the skills, the training or the teaching is moved from one generation to the next. So I'm sure Anne will tell you, if you're working with artisans, there'll be the grandmother, the mother, the child. So it's but they're taught the skills from in a linear way, how you source the product, how you convert the agave into fibers, how you dry it, how you dye it. And it's all very much around family, and they'll weave while the children are asleep, or they'll weave while they're cooking. So I think there is that sort of inherent education that exists that doesn't need to be taught again. I think that the skill set that the fashion industry can help with is the formalization of some of the talent. So if you compare the talent in Africa and you compare the talent in Asia, for example, there is a disparity in the level of quality of training, because the African formal sector, the industrial sector, is a lot younger than, say, some of the other third world countries that have been producing for a longer period. So they have a culture of training. But I think I think like the way we look at it is we mentor. We have a mentorship program that we run in Kenya, and we have teams. So it's almost like a trickle down. So we'll train specific, and it's all pro bono with myself and my team. It's all pro bono to the recipients of the training, and because they don't have access, there's the poverty levels are very, very high, right? So the average income is $1.90 in the informal sector. So, training people, soft skills like how to use a computer, how to send emails, so that so sometimes it's not even about like complex education. It's what we're finding is very basic skill. People are clever, people have a lot of common sense, and you can't really teach that. So it's things like what is a spreadsheet? How do you cost? Where is your margin? How much will it cost to, if you're buying, we'll help our artisans procure equipment as part of our 100% initiative. How much will that cost? How will they be able to pay that back, or how does that look in terms of a commercial? So that is education that I think is very valuable in this context, in our context where we're operating from, rather than going to a college and doing a degree or a long course in something that doesn't really teach you skills. So that's my
I
take on it.
completely agree. I completely agree, because even at Loud, the core of our work has been education. A lot of the work we've done, in the continent has been education. And one thing we realized was that, when it comes to technical education, fashion education, it's very informalized. There are no formal structures or systems to teach people about building careers in the industry, and even with technical skills. But when we started to put this programs together in small bits of courses, like you said, not anything complex, not college, we realized that a lot more people were learning. A lot more people were learning about how to cost, how to run a business, how to price, all of these tiny details that just really help them build better businesses and promote their craft. Thank you so much. So Nancy, I want you to sort of touch on the other part of education, which is when it comes to the developed countries and just the Western world. Do you think there needs to be some sort of introduction in fashion schools about ethical fashion, craftsmanship, artisanal fashion? Do you think that needs to be a part of the curriculum with fashion schools and formal colleges? I know that I just chipped this in, but Nancy, your mic is off.
But I got it.
Okay.
So absolutely. And because I'm a recent graduate, I experienced what it was like. It was a 3-year program in fashion school. And it was such a broad-based curriculum. That's where I started to learn about sustainability. That's also where I learned about adaptive design. And I don't think if I had that, but it was only a weekend workshop. It wasn't built into a program. And I know I think it might have been, it's one of the schools, either FIT or Parson, I think it's just started a course with adaptive design. But if I didn't have that class, I probably would not know what adaptive design is and how important it is to, again, reduce inequalities and to be more inclusive. And we talk about education, and I think we have to, and we're talking about fashion. But for me, what is fashion? And why are we having this conversation? Why it's so important? For me, fashion is so important because I remember I sold my first garment out of college. The person walked out of the dressing room, swirled around and started crying. She started crying. She said, "I've never felt more beautiful." She was wearing a garment I made. Now, everyone should have that opportunity to express who they are, to feel empowered, to build self-confidence. And for me, that's the foundation of why we need to, it's more about, it's about wearing clothes, but there's such a higher level of the importance of fashion as an individual to empower us. I know I'm going off on a tangent, and I'm probably not answering your question, But as far as education, education was key. I mean, that's why I got into fashion and skill set. You go back to the skill set, teaching the crafts which we need to in say Western countries that are not at the level that has been passed from generation to generation, such as I've heard today, which is so inspirational. We don't have, I don't think we have that appreciation. We don't place that value on craftsmanship, at least in my experience in my country.
Okay, thank you. And I think that we've sort of gotten a positive feedback from you on the importance of on the importance of adding this to formal education. Just like how you learned about adaptive design, I'm beginning to think of the thousands of people that can learn more about, ethical fashion. The more we include it in our curriculums in fashion schools and colleges. And just a bit away from education, Ima, I want us to sort of come back to one of the things that you had spoken about earlier, where you said that, when it comes to sustainable fashion and just pricing things well, it goes beyond just the brands. It also involves working with the government. So how does looking at fashion sustainability and ethics at a more holistic level, in terms of just beyond removing it from just counterparts to the entire ecosystem, how does that, help reduce global inequalities? Because again, like you said, the industry is very interconnected to a lot of other industries and the entire ecosystem. So how can we sort of pay more attention to looking at it on that holistic level? And if you were going to give any recommendations, what would they be?
So I think, to me, when we talk about sustainable fashion, there's two aspects of it. First, there's what we can literally sustain within our planetary boundaries, but then there's also what is right to sustain. Technically, we may be able to phase out fossil fuels and the unsustainable, environmentally destructive parts of the fashion industry, while still maintaining modern slavery, while still maintaining the exploitation of people and animals. And that's not a really truly sustainable system. So this is when we need to talk more holistically and look at what we talk about as total ethics fashion. And this is where we, consider that the life and well-being of people, of animals and the planet, we're all a part of nature. And so for sustainability really to be considered, we have to think of all of these groups rather than a more kind of sterile version of sustainability that doesn't consider actually the individuals who live here. So, if we look, for example, at current supply chain that exists, we could look at leather production, where at the moment China, India and Brazil are the major producers. There are at the moment issues of forced labor, deforestation, land rights issues, methane emissions, animal exploitation and environmental racism through the fact that, for example, the US has moved 90% of its tanneries to countries that are poorer and that are not white. And this is because they don't want to deal with the pollution. They want other people to deal with the pollution. And so if we look at something like this, we might see that all of these issues are isolated and disconnected, but I think actually they all come from this same issue of thinking that it is acceptable to put profit ahead of the well-being of all of us here. I think a really interesting fact to put this into perspective is if the work of modern slavery were a country, it would be the third largest carbon dioxide polluter in the world. This isn't a coincidence. It's because it's a system that is built on commodification of people and of the planet, and that's the same kind of root issue. So I would really like to see governments, I would really like to see the industry acknowledge the interconnectedness of these problems and not have conversations that are so separate. We have COP on at the moment and it is all about the environment, but we need to see issues of human rights involved in that space more too. We need to see these conversations become more one because they really are interconnected and we can't solve them separately.
Yes, I completely agree. And Anne, I want you to sort of touch on that question a bit, especially when with the marginalized communities that you're working with. So like Emma shared, we need government, we need the brands, everyone involved working together. So with working with marginalized community, do you think that the government also has a role to play in those spaces, especially with maybe funding the work of these people creating policies that make it easy for people to actually live and earn more. I want you to touch on it. And when you're done, I want Liza to touch on it too, because I know she had spoken about communities that didn't have minimum wage. And again, like Emma has said, it's not really a brand thing. I mean, there's so little you can do if you work in a community that has no minimum wage. You can't change that system. But I just want us to touch a bit on, the roles that we think that the government, human rights, and just other policies and agencies have to play in this whole conversation around sustainable and ethical fashion, and even just working with artisanal communities and low-income communities.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, in two ways, I think the government should be able to help. We're based in Nairobi and in Austin, Texas, in the USA. So in Kenya, when we started working with these women, they were still weaving. That's how we find them, because we can go to the market and see these women that are sitting there waiting to sell a basket. And they told us they drive in a public transportation for about 6 hours to just sell that one basket. And if they don't sell it, they sleep there in an outdoor market. Women, I felt like that's very unsafe, and they cannot afford a hotel or anything else, so they just sleep there and hope for the best. So that's how we meet them. And the reason most of them could not sell, or if they sold, they could not live themselves out of poverty, is because there was a lot of middlemen. They come into the women and say, I'll give you $1 for this basket. And if they don't take that $1, they will not be selling the basket anyway. So I might as well spend 3 weeks weaving a basket and then sell it for $1 or less than not sell it at all or have to sleep in an outdoor area. So the government of Kenya and the government of many other third world in Asia and Africa should be able to be to protect the women, really, where they give them access to markets, where they give them education on where to sell, where they reach out to people like me who work directly with the artisans and say, how can we help you? How can we help you figure out the shipping? Well, what are your problems right now? Shipping is a huge issue. Trying to ship from Africa to Austin is like, we finally have a relationship with British Airways, but before then, which we figured out this year, it was like, I'll sell my kidney for about 100 baskets. So anyway, that's something they should be able to help us with. And that way they're helping the women by removing the middlemen that are exploiting them and working with the women to see what social issues they would be helping them with. And at the same time, helping the brands that are reaching out to the women directly and saying, how can we help you? At the same time, here in the USA, we are currently working on a grant application with USAID, United States Aid. And they have a program that helps brands like me and people like me that are trying to work with the developing countries and working directly with the people there, create female entrepreneurship. It doesn't matter if it's artisans. And that way they're able to fund what I'm doing or help me access more resources and support and groups of other women who do what I'm trying to do here. And that has been very, very, very helpful. And we haven't gotten a grant awarded, but when we do, it will be such capital to include more women, because when we were there and we were going from village to village this year, a lot of what we saw was we had like a group of 20 women in a weaving group or a beading group, and they all wear our Sawa Sawa t-shirts and they look healthy and happy, and there's drums and music, it's Africa. And around the compound you would see all these poor women just sitting there and they're waiting to talk to us, and they're like, how can we join? We want to join. And we don't get involved in the politics of the weaving groups and who gets to join. But when you talk to the group leaders, they're like, if you order 100 more baskets, we can bring in 20 more women. So it's just about us being able to buy more, order more, work with them more, so more women can join existing groups and we can make more groups. And that will be possible with the United States aid giving us the grant we need. And they give you a grant and you use it right, they give you more. So that's a way that governments can come in to look at what we're trying to do, and as a source of direct alleviation of poverty and empowering of these women to help us achieve more goals. And it's exciting that those things exist, and we can see a future where we're not, like you said, in the background doing all the work, trying to stretch that dollar as far as it can go. And we can actually hire people to do that while we're able to be on the forefront, working with media and other people, saying, this is what we're doing. Please help us by buying. Please help us by volunteering, donating, and anything else you can do.
Wow. Well done. So Liza, I want you to touch on that a bit. I want you to touch on that a bit. And I also want you to just touch on, I mean, all of the conversation we've had again about this community are around the levels of poverty. So all of this work that, we're doing as small brands, can it really change? Does it really have an effect on the poverty level? Is it really a solution or an answer to the poverty problem that we have in some of these regions, in Africa and in Asia? Just from experience, from your work, within this region over the couple of years, what would you say about that? So it's two questions I've asked now. So the first one about the government, and then the second one on the poverty levels.
Yeah, I think with governments it's very difficult, because when you're dealing with artisans, they're contributing, although the informal sector is about 75% of the population in Africa are in the informal sector, which is a huge, so they contribute hugely, but to very much of a cash economy. So they're not really, they don't get the airtime as much as, more formal sector industries. But having said that, I do think there is something in, everybody doing their bit, because if governments don't see the value, it's actually down to us as brands who are committed to uplifting or sort of creating economic, I call it an economic incubation hub. So you start with one artisan, and then they get somebody else, and there's two artisans, and so we've been creating these economic hubs. And if you look at, say, Mauritius in the textile sector, they have a lot of concessions, but the government values the foreign revenue that the textile sector gives. So, for example, they get air freight concessions. So everything that is shipped from Mauritius is air freighted, but at a sea freight cost, because the government subsidizes it. But so unless a government actually sees the value, and we're so far down the food chain, particularly with artisans, it's, rather than waiting for governments to do stuff, I think trying to do our bit, and Anne and, tens of thousands of other people, we do see amazing stories coming out of the work that comes out of sort of working with artisans and sort of trying to promote them. So that's my view on government. It's like trying to turn a ship. It takes, how many miles does it need to turn? So it's that sort of thing. So yes, there is dialogue, but they just, they're otherwise engaged.
Yes. Okay.
So sorry, what was the second question?
With how does, in terms of given the high levels of poverty, are we sure we're not just scratching the surface? Are we really reducing inequalities and, solving poverty problems in these communities?
I mean, you can't not do anything. You can't not do nothing. You have to do something. And if you impact one life, that's one life you've impacted. You haven't impacted 10 million lives, but you've impacted that. And the societies in Kenya, particularly with communities that are very poor, like Anne said, one income supports, like my beading, I use one particular woman to do my beading, and she supports 9 people in her family, because they've had, whatever unfortunate deaths and so on. So that one income supports 9 people in that family. So, as a brand, I feel a real obligation to keep her busy and keep her in an income, have an income funnel coming in. So I think we just need more of us to do our bit, and collectively we'll create our own domino while we wait for governments to change policy or all of that. But we can't sit and wait.
Yes. Well done, Liza. Well done, and well done, everyone. I think that it's just interesting how we see problems and we sort of rise to the occasion and create solutions to these problems. Just hearing everyone share about the work they're doing and just the lives that are being transformed. I think that women are absolutely amazing. I think we should give ourselves a round of applause because I think that we're doing amazing work. Okay, so let's just bring it a bit, now to Nancy, and just let's speak a bit on adaptive designing. What has your experience in what has been your experience in how adaptive designing can reduce inequalities in the fashion industry?
Well, first, listening to Anne and Liza, I'm kind of overwhelmed. Your stories kind of have me very emotional. I started out saying how honored I'm to be on the panel, and now I'm almost feeling intimidated that it's just lonely me, emerging designer. Am I doing enough? But then, Liza, you took it back and you got me back on and saying, if you make a difference with one person, and that's what I'm going to hang on to. And I think all of us, and those listening in, we need to hang on to, no matter what it is we're doing, it matters. And we can't wait. We can't stop. And that's how I am about adaptive design. I was on Project Runway, and I got to design for the world's fastest female racer in the world. And she came rolling down the runway, and I screamed, I wanted to design for her. And I did. And then I got to have the most inclusive zero waste collection in the finale. But that's where it stopped. The next year they didn't even have a disabled model. I think it's important for people to know, and I'll try to be quick, what adaptive design is. And it's tough because that's what I wanted to do when I got off Project Runway. And there's not a one size that fits all. They can't just go to a rack and buy something. This is an adaptive look. And people say on the Vault by Volby Beringer, it's a luxury resale. Yes, it's very expensive. And people say, well, the disabled people have a lot of medical expenses. Well, again, I'm not judging. I couldn't afford it myself at one point in my life. I want fashion to be accessible, and that means not judging and not saying, well, you can't have it because you're disabled. This is an adaptive jacket, exactly how it would look, how I would wear it. This happens to be button. This looks like it's button. I took the buttons off. I sewed the buttonholes up. It's Velcro. That's how you can adapt something that's simple. I have something in the background. It's a robe for a woman that's she's going to be a judge. She's quadriplegic. So how do I make her judicial robe adaptive? So for me, it's like a one-stop, do I know how to do that? No, but I'm trying to make it so that, again, everybody has fashion accessible to them. Adaptive design is really hard to scale. There's feeding tubes, there's so many different needs, but it's still needed. So I'm going with you, Liza. I'm going with you. If I can get one person, if I can help that young woman who's quadriplegic, who can't dress herself, wear her robe when she gets it, I'm going to do it. And I guess I'm just not going to stop. And I need to see these baskets and beads. I do have to say that before I'm cut off. I need to see them, and we get them. Sorry, I went off again. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I think that every one of our speakers in today's session is doing such amazing work. Such amazing work. And I think that, again, sometimes we do these things, we see problems and we create solutions, and we don't realize how that one bit of our work is changing somebody's entire life and changing the next generation to the next generation to the next generation. And that brings me to the next question that I think I'm going to ask everybody. I want everyone to just sort of chip in on this conversation, which is how does being a female founder, and having an opportunity to create and run a company, how does that create equity for the modern women and even for the other women, the younger women, as female founders, the work that you currently do? How do you think that creates equity for the modern woman and for the younger woman? So we'll just, take it according to the way I see it on my screen. I see Liza first. So I'll take Liza first, then Anne, then Ima, and then Nancy.
Yeah, I think being an entrepreneur is difficult, whether you're male or female. You're everything. You're doing the soup to the nuts. I mean, you're covering the broad spectrum until you start building out a team. But you just need tenacity. You just need focus, and I think more importantly, is just to have purpose. I think regardless of what you're doing, and what age you are, whether it's a 19-year-old with an amazing idea or a 61-year, I don't think it really matters. I think in the world we live in, having a purpose is really important.
Okay, that was a punch. So it's about having purpose. It's about, and I completely can relate to that. Again, I think that this conversation, I don't think Nancy's the only one that's overwhelmed. I think I am overwhelmed too, because again, I just think about even the work that we started to do with Loud. It started from being in a marginalized space and just seeing a lot of young people in the grassroots struggling to get a grasp of the industry and struggling to be a part of the industry. And that sense of purpose sort of drew me to say, how can we create more opportunities for these people? How can we educate more of these people? And now I think back, I think of the number of people that now work in the fashion industry, number of people that are now employed from just the initiatives and programs that we've created. It's so overwhelming. And I think again that this panel session has been so educative. So I hope I'm not the only one who's feeling emotional here, but I think this is what happens when you're in the room with people that are actually doing the work. So I'm sorry I went off. And do you want to just touch on that, on being a female founder?
I agree with Liza. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of resiliency and doing consistency and doing something small every day to grow it. And then opportunities start coming to you. And like today, we got invited to the United Nations platform because of what we've been doing. Someone acknowledged and saw we're trying to make a difference. And that in itself feeds to your system of, oh, I'm going to give up. And then I went to Africa and then I realized I cannot give up. So you come home and you have all this pressure, all these women, their children, their goats, now they have chickens to feed. How can I help? And so it helps you live a life of purpose. And when you're doing something that has a purpose outside of yourself, outside of your, how can I get more? How can I get more? How can I give more? And when you give more comes to you. And when you build it, they'll come. Everything starts building itself. You're just there. And as long as you're putting the work, as long as you're driven, as long as you take initiative, as long as you figure it out, everything else starts coming and making its way to build something bigger for you, to be of purpose and to be of service to others. So I couldn't do it any other way. It's hard, but it's worth it.
Yes, it's worth it. So Annie's saying the more you give, the more comes to you, and then you're able to give more. And that's consolidating what Liza said about just moving with a sense of purpose. Emma, do you want to add something to that?
I think for me, while there are challenges with running a charity, with trying to get funding to push government, to push industry to change, I live in an extremely privileged position. So I think as a woman who's a founder of a charity, I want to use that privilege to help women who are, producing really important change and doing good things within fashion that don't have that same privilege. Just to highlight one woman like that. We work with Kaxikori Studio, which produces an amazing biomaterial in the Amazon rainforest. And the oldest woman involved there is in her 70s now. Her name is Doris. And she's really helped to bring back to life this traditional practice of taking sap from the sharinga tree, a native tree there, and turning it into a material that can look like leather, but is free from synthetics, free from animal-derived materials. And that's really important to them because 80% of deforestation in the Amazon is tied to cattle ranching, and mining is a huge issue there too. And so I feel from the position that I am that it's so important for me to be able to lift up the people that are doing that work and that are seeing the problems in their specific circumstances and doing something about it. So I think, that's what I'm here for.
Thank you. So am I saying, she's talking about when you sort of find that you have an opportunity to support the people doing the work, ensure you do so. Okay, so Nancy, do you want to add anything to that? Mike?
I feel good. Okay. I feel I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to share what I learned, to share my passion. When I was at Drexel, again, I graduated in 61. The question I was asked by all my young classmates, I went to more 21st birthday parties than anyone. What are you going to do when you graduate? And I think they're saying, what's an old person going to do? Because it's such a hard program. And I didn't answer the question because I get too focused. I didn't say children's work, I didn't say sports work. I said, I want to be relevant. That's all I knew, is that I wanted to be a relevant designer. I want to be a relevant person. I want to make a difference. I want to have a purpose. So as soon as I graduated, I got to sell my things at the top fashion store in Philadelphia. But I also got to work with the refugee women, the Southeast program. And I got to teach them the skills that I learned in school, teaching them about ice dyeing, sewing, so that they could make their products, sell them to help them on their way to citizenship. I've always tried to use my voice. I just spoke to 100 incoming freshmen at Drexel about adaptive design, inclusive design. So for me as an entrepreneur, as I'm struggling, trying to keep my voice heard, trying to bring in some income, try to scale my business, for me, my most valued commodity I have and purpose is the responsibility that I feel to share what we're all doing and our need, and why we just can't stop. We just can't stop.
Yes. I think that this has been such an impactful conversation, so impactful. And, we are living with a greater sense of responsibility and purpose towards our work. I mean, there's so many words and so many experiences and stories that have been told today. And, there's so many things. I mean, we heard, do the work. That one work you do, you have no idea how it can impact so many other people. We heard, don't wait for the government. It can be a bit complicated working with the government. Start to do the things that you can do with your immediate space. We've heard giving back. When you've received, give back. When you've learned, teach. If you've been educated, pass it on to somebody. If you have privilege, create more room for people who actually do the work to sort of be a part of that. And I think it's been such an impactful conversation. And if there's anything, I think we all should be leaving this call with a greater sense of conviction that fashion can actually empower lives. Fashion can actually change lives. Yes, it's about the style, it's about everything that looks good, but beneath that, there's an entire ecosystem that can change, the way people live, can change the quality of lives of people in different locations. And it can even just change, how we see and relate and interact with our environment and our planet. I think there's so many takeaways from this conversation. I don't know if we have any final words we want to share, any exciting projects we want to share. I'm also looking at see if there are any questions. But if not, I think that this is where we'll start to wrap the conversation. But I want to give our speakers, if there's any final words or charge or any project or anything you want to share with the audience today, we can take a quick one before we round it up for today. Anyone? Okay, no one. Okay.
I just
okay, Nancy and Anne.
What I just wanted to say was, when we're talking about addressing young people to get them on board, I agree with what was said. It's any age. It's any age. I hear through social media, when they hear stories like ours, it inspires them to say, oh, it's not too late. I can still do it. So no matter what your age, we might have challenges, but it's not too late to make a difference. Don't let age or, stop you from making a difference.
Yes.
That's the same sentiment I wanted to share. If you're out there, you can always help. There's always something to help. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. You can follow us on social media. You can share our work with somebody else. You can write to us and say, hey, I heard about this other company that's doing this. For example, we live in Austin and we are trying very hard to work with Whole Foods that is also out of Austin, but it's very hard. So if you have any connections or anything that you feel can be helpful, just help. Just reach out to me and say, I have something, help.
Amazing. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. This has been such a wholesome conversation. Thank you to everyone who's joined this conversation. I hope that we're leaving with a greater sense of conviction, and just a push and a drive, a sense of purpose to sort of go out and be a part of a change or do something impactful with our passion and our purpose. Thank you so much, everyone. And this is where we will say bye. Thank you, Liza. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Emma. It was so great to chat with you today. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
And thank you to the team at the UN Conscious Fashion Lifestyle Network.
Thank you.
Bye.